This program is brought to you by Emory University.
So welcome to all of you, especially, and I guess most of you are reunion year participants, but I noticed some folks sneak in to enjoy this particular session. I would like to pick up where you left off in your message, this notion about the overriding responsibility and necessity for our law schools and law professions to pay attention to a rule of law. One could say that the overriding mission of the entire legal profession could be summarized in the following way: perhaps to maintain and broaden what Ben Johnson III, who would be Dean Ben Johnson's son and the chair of our board, an alum of Emory, Ben Johnson described it as the thin veneer of civilization that incompletely covers the land and the world. And where and when that veneer exists, it is our responsibility to exercise within it effective governance, effective rule of law. During these times of divisiveness and polarization, we grow concerned that the effectiveness of governance is compromised. And we worry further that to the extent that divisive polarization leads to incivility, it may be that our national veneer of civilization is at risk of becoming thin. And so that's the topic for our panelists in this session. Polar Opposites is the title, the challenge of governance in a time of political polarization. And it's my privilege to run down the line here and introduce to all of you those who will put us at ease today. Maybe we didn't talk enough in the green room. I thought. At my far right, your left, is Dr. Tom Clark. Tom's an associate professor of political science department here at Emory with a joint appointment in Emory Law. His research is focused on the American political institutions and judicial politics. And current projects include studying lawmaking and the judicial hierarchy, developing statistical models for legal doctrine, and examining the consequences of various methods of selection for the responsiveness of state Supreme Court justices and how those selection processes are affected by public opinion, how they are affected by public opinion. He's been published widely in academic journals, and his book, entitled The Limits of Judicial Independence, won a 2012 William H. Riker Award for the Best Book in Political Economy from the American Political Science Association. He received a BA from Rutgers, his master's and PhD's degrees in politics from Princeton University. He's the only one up here who is not an alum, but still very much a part of the Emory family. Please welcome Professor Clark. The Honorable Elliott H. Levitas. And let me finish. He's a native of Atlanta, served as a DeKalb County representative in the Georgia General Assembly for 9 years, represented Georgia's 4th Congressional District in the United States House of Representatives for a decade, received the Thomas B. Murphy Lifetime Achievement Award from the Democratic Party of Georgia in 2008, consistently recognized by the Best Lawyers in America publication for governmental relations law, and by Georgia Trend magazine as one of Georgia's legal elite for governmental affairs. He will be awarded next week, in fact, Emory's highest alumnus honor in his case, and that is the Emory Medal, at a ceremony that will take place next week. And he's here celebrating his 60th undergraduate reunion weekend, holds a BA and law degree from Emory, served in the United States Air Force, and as a Rhodes Scholar, received a Master's of Law degree from Oxford University, and now, please welcome. Thank you. Elliott Levitas. Third is the Honorable Sanford D. Bishop, Jr. After 15 years in the Georgia House of Representatives and the Georgia Senate, Sandy Bishop was elected in 1992 to represent Georgia's 2nd Congressional District, Southwest Georgia. where he still serves today. He's held many leadership positions in the House, including Senior Democratic Whip for the 112th Congress and Chairman of a Democratic House Task Force on Homeland Security and of the Working Group on Defense of Physical Infrastructure and Natural Resources. He's a member of the Blue Dog Coalition of fiscally conservative House Democrats, co-chairman and co-founder of the Congressional Military Family Caucus and the Caucus on a Chicken Industry. He graduated from Morehouse College and from Emory Law, served in the U.S. Army, is also an Eagle Scout, a Mason, and a Shriner. We're delighted to have Representative Bishop with us here today. The Honorable Samuel S. Olens. Sam Olens became Georgia's Attorney General in January of 2011, having served as the chairman of the Cobb County Board of Commissioners, as chair of the Atlanta Regional Commission, as vice chair of the Metropolitan North Georgia Water Planning District, and as a member appointed by Governor Sonny Perdue to the 6th Congressional District on Georgia's Department of Community Affairs Board. Georgia Trend magazine regularly lists Olens as one of the 100 most influential Georgians, and you can see for good reason. And he received in 2007 Excellence in Public Service Award from the University of Georgia's Carl Vinson Institute and the 2008 Tom Bradley Leadership Award from the National Association of Regional Councils. In 2011, he was honored when the Cobb Chamber of Commerce named its annual Community Service Award the Sam Olens Community Service Award. He holds a BA and MA from the American University and received his law degree from Emory. He is a registered mediator and arbitrator of the Georgia Office of Dispute Resolution. Please welcome Sam Olens. The Honorable Sam A. Nunn Jr. celebrates his 50th law reunion this weekend and is the co-chairman and chief executive officer of the Nuclear Threat Initiative. He began his career in politics as a member of the Georgia House of Representatives and represented Georgia as a U.S. Senator for 24 years, serving as chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee and the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, as well as on the Intelligence and Small Business Committees. His legislative achievements include the landmark Department of Defense Reorganization Act and the Nunn-Lugar Cooperative Threat Reduction Program, which provides assistance to Russia and former Soviet republics for securing and destroying excess nuclear, biological, and chemical weaponry. In addition to his work with the Nuclear Threat Initiative, he has continued to serve in the public policy arena as distinguished professor in the Sam Nunn School of International Affairs at Georgia Tech and as chairman of the board of the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. He attended Georgia Tech, Emory University, Emory Law School, from which he graduated with honors. He also happens to be an Eagle Scout and served in the U.S. Coast Guard. Please welcome Senator Nunn. And finally, our moderator for today is the Honorable M. Yvette Miller. Yvette Miller was appointed to the Court of Appeals by Governor Roy Barnes in July of 1999, becoming the first African-American woman on that court. She has been re-elected statewide twice without any opposition and was selected by her fellow judges to serve as chief judge for a 2-year term. Governor Zell Miller appointed her to serve as director and judge of the appellate division of the State Board of Workers' Compensation. The Atlanta Business Chronicle has listed her among who's who in law, and the Georgia Informer designated her as one of Georgia's top 50 influential black women. She is a native Georgian with a BA cum laude from Mercer University and law degrees from Mercer's Walter F. George School of Law, from Emory Law, and from the University of Virginia School of Law. Judge Miller, we're delighted to have you with us. And I'm pleased to turn the microphone over to you.
All right, thank you. Well, good morning and welcome. It is indeed an honor and a privilege to sit here today with many of my heroes and mentors. I claim each and every one of them. So it is truly an honor. President Wagner, Dean Shapiro, thank you for inviting me here to participate in this most important and timely discussion regarding the state of our nation's governance. I'm truly honored to serve as the moderator with such a distinguished group of panelists. Our nation's leaders are engaged in political polarization. For the past several years, it seems that all we can hear that comes out of Washington, D.C. are problems, more problems, and pitfalls. With the presidential election less than 2 months away, the political temperature is rising and rising even more. Clearly, our leaders are not functioning together to serve the great citizens of this great nation. There's too much division, and as a result, this country is at an impasse. This topic is important because we are all citizens, the topic of polarization. We're all citizens of these United States, and therefore we're all impacted by the political process. When the process breaks down, due to partisan politics, it affects each and every one of us. The panel today will address some of the problems that have led to the political polarization and the challenges that it presents. And most importantly, this distinguished panel, I believe, will discuss solutions to the problems and ways to effectuate a change in today's government. So with that being said, let's proceed with the very first question. And I would like to direct this question to Senator Nunn. Senator, what is your view of the current political climate in Washington, D.C., and how do you believe it is affecting our democracy today?
I'm going to defer ultimately to Sanford Bishop, who's there now, and I'm gone. But the people that I serve with who are still there, or those who've just left, tell me that it has gotten substantially worse. And also, I would say when the lobbyists start telling you that they're disgusted with the system, you know you got a real problem. And both have happened to me. I think where it affects us the most right now is the fiscal problem. The world is in a very fragile economy. The United States is in a fragile recovery. Thankfully, we are recovering, but it's very fragile. And we have a fiscal cliff coming in January that almost everybody, whether they're from the left or the right economically, says will take us into recession because it's a massive tax increase and a very large spending cut all of a sudden. We got into these problems over 30 years. The demographics have been driving our problem for a long time, and we have not addressed it. So every year you let it go by, you basically let it go further, and it gets harder. The demographics are basically the blessing of longer life. We are living longer, and we have not adjusted our social programs to that. When we passed Social Security and Medicare, the life expectancy was, don't hold me to the exact numbers, but in the mid-60s. Now life expectancy is from 78 to 82 or 3, somewhere in there. No insurance company could write policy, actuarial policies on that basis or have annuities on that basis. They would go broke. But we haven't squared that with the American people. We basically cannot pay for the baby boom retirees that are coming now with the current revenue that we have coming in for Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, and prescription drugs, a more recent program, had no funding when it was passed. So that's all on the general budget. So the main thing we need now is for the leaders to square with the American people. This country is a great country. We'll face up to problems when we know we've got problems, but right now both political parties are not using common sense and not using arithmetic, and they basically are misleading people every day. So when the hole is there, to get out of it, you quit digging. We've got to find a way to do that. I would say the biggest problem with polarization right now, to wrap up my answer, we can come back to more details, is what it's doing to our fiscal house. If we do not get our fiscal house in order, we will not restore confidence, and if we don't restore confidence, we will not have growth in the economy. Growth in the economy is the most important ingredient, both for taking care of the unemployed, which are a big problem, and in taking care of the deficit. But we have to face up to the demographics.
Next, I'd like to ask Congressman Levitas to give me, please, sir, what is your view on political parties And do you believe that the parties help Americans, or do they only serve to further divide our citizens?
Well, specifically, the government of this nation has got to express itself through some formal type of institution. Without political parties, however poorly they may operate, we would have a chaos of diverse voices that don't get focused. At least political parties have the benefit of focusing the issues one way or the other. And in that regard, I think it is significant that what happened last year when the Tea Party took over the Republican Party in the House of Representatives, and I defer to Sanford about that if I'm misstating it, but when they took over and shaped the policy of the Republican Party in the Congress, in the House, they, at that time, made two commitments. One of those commitments was that we are not going to be like these other people who've come before us. We're not going to compromise. We're going to come up to Washington and we're going to stand for what we stand for, take it or leave it, but we're not going to compromise. And the second thing they did that day is they said, and furthermore, because the rest of you don't really understand this, we're going to read the Constitution of the United States word for word. Sure enough, they did that. Now, I have found that to be one of the great ironies of modern day politics. On the one hand, the Tea Party that is driving the Republican Party in the House says, we're not going to compromise. And on the other hand, they want you to read the Constitution of the United States. Professor, I may be wrong, but I don't personally know of any political document that contains more compromises than the Constitution of the United States. The Great Compromise, the Connecticut Compromise, any senators from each state, House representing the populace. There are dozens of them rife throughout that document. And yet these are the people who are telling you, we're not going to compromise. This nation cannot work without accommodation and compromise. We've already, each one of us in this room, have already paid a price for the uncompromising attitude of people in the Congress of the United States. When the credit rating of this nation was downgraded for the first time in my lifetime, it wasn't done just because of a massive debt. That was part of it. But it was done because the rating agencies looked at the Congress of the United States and didn't think these people were capable of governing because they couldn't reach accommodation and compromise. And I think that that threat to this nation, threat of no compromise in trying to govern the United States, is one of the greatest dangers we face today. We face certainly threats from from terrorism. We certainly face other threats, external and internal. But I believe that the greatest danger to our republic is an attitude of no compromise. I'm not saying you compromise on fundamental principles, but you have to compromise on governance in this society, or we cannot govern ourselves. And until that changes, I think we're in for a rough time.
Insightful answer. And I would like to follow up on that and just go right to Congressman Bishop and say, Why is it that today it appears that compromise is now a dirty word?
I wish that I could answer that question. It's baffling to me, given the history of our country, given the history of our Constitution, given the fact that politics is the art of compromise. Of course, politics is defined as who gets what, when, and how. And of course, policy makers make those decisions, elected officials, but you always are going to have differences of opinion. But in our system, it has always been designed and it has always worked so that people are able to find common ground, a middle ground. You don't get everything that you want, but you get a little bit, the other side gets a little bit. I was a student of political science, college. I practiced law. I was in the Georgia legislature. I have been in Congress now for almost 20 years. I have seen this polarization develop, and it's a phenomenon that is very, very dangerous. When it's impossible for people to sit across the table and resolve issues that we're charged with the responsibility of resolving for the benefit of the people that we represent, the people of the United States. We are not discharging our duty, and it's a bad, bad situation for our country and for our governance. I believe that it has come about for a number of reasons, and let me just highlight a publication that is written by Thomas Mann and Norman Ormstein. It's called "It's Even Worse Than It Looks." How the American constitutional system collided with the new politics of extremism. Norman Ormstein and Thomas Mann are both scholars and historians of the Congress, and they have documented the trends that have gotten us to the place where we are. Among them are the fact that we have instant news cycles. We have members now that are so polarized that, well, we don't spend much time together. When Senator Nunn was in the Congress, and when Congressman Levitas was in the Congress, members of both parties spent time together. Everybody didn't leave immediately after the last vote to go back to their districts. The opportunity to get to know one another, for families to get to know one another, was there. The opportunity to travel together, where you actually get to know people from the other side of the aisle, was very, very, very prevalent. Now we get to know each other on Codels. Another supplemental or auxiliary organization that helped with the ability of people to develop relationships was the Congressional Club, which is the spouses organization, which was chartered by the Congress. At the time, mostly the spouses were ladies, but the fact that they were able to have an organization across party lines with the spouses, and of course now it's spouses who are male, spouses who are female, but they developed relationships. And I have found over the years that almost 40 years that I've been involved in politics, that relationships are key to the ability to resolve issues. Whether it's practicing law, whether it's in the legislature or in the Congress, you've got to have a personal relationship with your colleagues in order to be able to go past the issues that may have strong disagreement. But ultimately, if you have respect for one another and you have relationships, even after the discussions that form the basis of your disagreements, you lay that aside and you relate as human beings one to the other because you have relationships. And those relationships should and have historically transcended the issues, which allow you to come together the next day or the next week and agree on issues where you have common feelings, but still disagree on those issues that you don't. But you find a way to find common ground. We have not been able to do that in the last 2 to 3 years, and it has been getting worse. And hopefully, there will be some direction from you, we, the people, that this is unacceptable, that we have got to have people that will go to Washington and get the people's business done. Not Republican solutions, not Democrat solutions, but American solutions.
Now, General Olens, you have a reputation of being quite a good leader who has the capability of being able to reach across the aisle and get things done. Albeit on the state level, we are concerned about this state and this nation. Could you tell us how you've been able to foster that type of an environment and build that kind of reputation?
Well, you know, first of all, I've had a great mentor through my political career, and that's Senator Isaacson, who lives 5 minutes from me. And he fits that mode just like Senator Nunn, who went throughout his political career to solve problems rather than to create problems. When I was growing up, you know, when I was in law school here and all, Senator Nunn was one of the very few. I can think of Scoop Jackson, you know, a couple other folks that frankly were people that sought to solve national problems. You'd be really hard-pressed to think of 5 now out of the 535 federal elected officials in Congress at present. So I think a lot of it is, I think the public desires honesty more than anything else. And I think if you go to town halls, and from my county commission days, I mean, I went to town halls all the time. The public doesn't get mad at you if you disagree with them on an issue. The public gets mad at you if you're inaccessible and if you don't make your opinions known to them. And I think we live in a day and age where Congress, or this nation, is governed by continuing resolutions with little legislation being passed. And I tend to think of governance by continuing resolution as governance by the inept, because that's totally unacceptable. The fact that Congress, for instance, left so early now when you've got this fiscal cliff, there seems to be a desire for partisanship to be more important than helping our country. So when you have folks such as Senator Nunn, who were quoted in the paper recently about the fact that we need to get people together to actually solve this fiscal problem. Now, I recall when President Bush sought to revise Social Security, it was not pretty, the response in D.C. when he sought to do that. And of course, the problem's harder to solve now than it was when he was president, because now we've got how many more trillions of dollars of debt. So I think the answer, you know, is frankly to be accountable and to reach across the aisle. I will tell you, the state of Georgia is run very, very different than D.C. Thank goodness. You know, in the Georgia House, the minority leader is Stacey Abrams. Stacey works very well with folks on the other side of the aisle, and most significant litigation, she's in the meetings helping to finalize the form of the bill. She is constructive. On the Senate side, Jason Carter is very engaged and helpful in that regard. And of course, we have one responsibility Congress wouldn't have a clue how to deal with, called the balanced budget. And we do that every year, and it is painful and it creates hardships, but it is required. And I would suggest that reaching out and touching someone, as Sanford Bishop just stated, is essential. And he's 100% correct that it doesn't happen anymore. And I found a long time ago that if you treat people nicely, they'll treat you nicely in return. It's that golden rule works at every level. And, you know, for instance, Senator Isaacson, going back to him again, he meets with folks that oppose his point of view. As a result of those meetings, the bite is far smaller because you can respectfully disagree. But if you don't choose to meet, the bite is far louder. And I think, unfortunately, we don't have the leadership nationally that we need, and I'm not blaming it on one party or another party. I think there's plenty of blame to go along, where folks aren't, you know, candidly doing their job.
May I interject something here? I think that you've really touched on a very, very cogent point. Last year, a community group came to me and said, we would like to put together a group on collegiality within the Georgia delegation. We'd like to bring members of the delegation together on a bipartisan basis to talk about some of the issues that are facing and what it takes to get along. I said, but I don't know that we'll be able to make it happen, because I approached one of the members of the delegation and he says, oh, I don't want to sit down with them because they don't agree with me. I don't agree with anything they say, so we don't have anything to talk about, so I don't want to sit down with them. So no, we're not going to have that kind of a meeting. And that, I thought, was very, very illustrative of what we're faced with. If you look at the fiscal situation that Senator Nunn outlined, the Simpson-Bowles Commission did an excellent job in laying out what the challenges were that we faced and what the probable solutions were. No, not one solution, but it would take a combination depending upon the nuances. Well, everybody thought it made sense. The super committee was formed to implement it, but once the super committee started to make recommendations, and when, even on the debt ceiling issue, when the leader and the president thought that they had a resolution and had reached an agreement, when it got back to the new element of the Republican conference, who came with a commitment not to compromise, Speaker Boehner had to go back to the president and said, you know, I'm sorry, this will not fly with our conference. And the reason was because you had people who came committed to no compromise. That defeats the effectiveness of our government, and it really creates the gridlock from which we're all suffering.
And now I would like to pivot and ask Senator Nunn, because you brought something up, Congressman Bishop, and that is, I would like to ask Senator Nunn to comment on why it appears that there is a lack of courage sometimes and a lack of commitment demonstrated by our leaders of today, unlike the type of courage that we saw on a consistent basis from leaders like yourself when you were in the Senate. Can you comment on that?
Well, back when we were there, and Elliott and I served together, and Sanford and I served together for a few years also, it wasn't that we didn't disagree. We had furious arguments. There were big issues, but we respected each other. I made a talk when I was retiring. I was given a parade out at the Pentagon by Bill Perry, Secretary of Defense, and I made a little talk out there, and I said this more or less impromptu, but it was true, that I never passed a major piece of legislation in my 24 years where I didn't have a Republican partner. Not one. Not one. We always tried to find a way to govern. Elliott said it, this is what you have to do. You have to govern. And we would not have a constitution today if we had not had people who knew they had an obligation to reach agreement. And what what Sam said about what our duty is to be truthful is absolutely correct. And that's not happening on the fiscal side now. If, in fairness, it hadn't happened from either party. Basically, somebody joked the other day that right now the American people have the best of both worlds. They send Democrats up to make sure all the entitlement programs continue, and they send Republicans up to make sure we don't pay for it. And we're borrowing 40 cents out of every dollar. 40 cents out of every dollar. Our interest on debt's $200 billion today, $200 billion. But that's with extremely low interest rates. You normalize the interest rates, which will happen over the next 10 years, and if you keep the trend lines going like they are now, in about 11 years, 10, 11 years, we're going to have interest of $900 billion a year. $900 billion per year. So it's a serious situation. And what we've tried to do, we've got a bunch of people together now, I'm calling us over the hill gang, because I know others will. But we have Republicans and Democrats. We have myself and Senator Byer, both retired, of course, and Senator Rudman and Senator Domenici, and a number of others, including former Senator Howard Baker, former Republican leader. And we're going around and doing forums on the fiscal side. We've done 3. We did one with Bob Rubin and Jim Baker. Now, 2 Treasury Secretaries, and you could have, if you look at that, you can get it on tape, but if you look at it, you'll realize these guys don't agree on everything. They could get together in about one day and give a sound proposal. Then we had Secretary Bob Gates, who served in several administrations, Republican and Democrat, and former Chairman of the Joint Chief Admiral Mullen. And they basically, both of them said, the biggest security problem this nation faces is within. It's our budget. Both of them said that. It's not somebody threatening us from outside. It's what we're doing to ourselves. And then just 2 days ago in New York, we had 2 of the most respected economists in the country, Marty Feldstein and Larry Summers. One of them a Democrat, one of them a Republican, but both brilliant on economics. And they both talked about the huge dangers we face and the fact that we have to get together. Everything has to be on the table. The revenue side has to be on the table. The entitlement side has to be on the table. And that's what's at stake right now. So I think the people in the Congress are not, they're not dumb folks, they're smart folks, but the other dimension of this thing is the people back home have to be part of this. Is the way I see the political situation now, the wings of both parties are flapping real hard. They're very active, they put big money in, they get extremely involved, and the middle basically doesn't get very involved. Now the wings have every right to get involved. You have every right to have a Tea Party, but it's the Tea Party and others like them, left and right, when it comes to governing, if you let them govern or try to govern, it's like the dog that catches the car. They don't know how to govern because they don't know how to compromise. They don't know how to work together. They don't know how to listen. And what was said a few minutes ago about Johnny Isaacson, Sam said it very well, listening to other people. The congressional reapportionment over the last 30, 40 years, this hadn't come about suddenly, basically has drawn districts so that your only problem is getting elected within your own party. And you don't need to talk to people on the other side. You got 80% of the districts in the country that are safe districts, meaning don't talk to the other side. Don't listen to the other side. You can't have a big, diverse country like ours without listening to other people, taking into account that point of view, respecting them even when you disagree with them. And I agree with you about Johnny. Johnny does that. And I think we ought to say a good word about Saxby Chambliss, too, because
Absolutely.
Saxby's out there working with Senator Mark Warner, Democrats and Republicans working together. But Saxby's big problem now, what does he do in the primary? You know, is it a sin to work together? So I think that the middle has to rise up. They have to get involved. And one of the questions you need to ask people who are running for office, federal office, not simply what your position is, are you willing to consider for a moment that you might not be correct? Are you willing to listen to the other side? And I think the public also has to understand that even if you are 100% sure that your political party or your candidate is right, and the other party is 100% wrong, even if that's your premise, no party after this election is going to be able to impose its will fiscally on the other. So they have to work together. So I would ask, are you willing to listen? Are you willing to learn? Are you willing to work with other people to govern this great country? But let me say one other word, because you can get too pessimistic in this business. We got all sorts. We're one deal, somebody said it not long ago, we're one big fiscal deal, a big one, away from restoring a lot of economic leadership in the world right now. We've been given a mulligan in terms of energy. The natural gas is coming now, is giving us a competitive advantage that we have not had in 30 years. It's a huge, huge competitive advantage. If we get our fiscal house in order, we're going to be able to restore, not everything like it was, but we're going to be able to restore a lot of better jobs, manufacturing jobs. Our neighbors, we got good neighbors, Mexico and Canada. Canada's doing well. Mexico is getting more and more jobs back from China, as a matter of fact. So we've got a lot to look forward to. One other thing, I heard somebody else give a good analogy the other day. He said, if you look all over the world and you take all the troubles in the world and you have people come together and put them in one big pile with the idea that you're going to walk away with an equal amount of trouble. Everybody's going to take their share of the global trouble. We would be very happy to take our little pile we brought with us and go back home quietly with nobody noticing. We have a lot to be thankful for, and we can restore this country's economy, and we can make a brighter future for our children, but only if we work together, and only if we listen, and only if we put the country before the political parties.
Right. Congressman. Okay, now moving on, we're going to just go in a slightly different direction for a few minutes and talk about, I'd like to address this to Professor Clark. Is diversity in the political parties or diversity in Congress, is that important in 21st century America?
Well, I think that's a very interesting question that makes me want to react first in response to that to something that both the Attorney General and the Senator raised, and that is the role that the public plays in the level of polarization that we see in politics right now. One of the things that we as political scientists study and don't have an answer to is what is the source of the polarization? Is it that we have more polarized leaders or that we have more polarized public that induces the leaders to be more polarized? And something that both the Attorney General and the Senator touched on was the incentives that elected officials face, be it in a primary or in a general election, and Senator Nunn's comments about the efforts he's engaging in with other former senators and other former elected officials highlights the extent to which one is freed from concerns about a partisan challenger or an electoral challenger in a general election after an electoral career, an elected career. And so when you think about the contemporary political environment and specifically the diversity of a party's composition, you immediately begin to wonder, well, what effects does that create for my leaders in Congress when a party is more or less diverse? And so the Tea Party in Congress, to which the congressman, or about which the congressman talked, is an interesting example because those members of Congress weren't just dropped down in Congress out of nowhere. They were elected, of course, which suggests that in the context of an election, a plurality, at the very least, of the population thought that they deserved to be there leading them. And their views were not unknown when they were elected. And so when a political party fields a slate of candidates, they have to think, well, who's going to be voting for these candidates? Obviously, in a primary, you have multiple candidates who are considered, and the ones who win that election wind up having to face a challenger from the other side. And so that is an issue that a leader, and as the other panelists who've served in elective office, and I never have and never will, I hope. No offense, just not the direction I hope to go in my life. Those leaders are thinking forward about the election that they'll face. And when they look at who's going to be voting, for example, in a party primary, this is a serious concern. And Senator Nunn said, I believe the wings are flapping hard. And one of the things that we know in the political science literature is that the relatively extreme people in terms of politics tend to be the ones who are most interested in politics. And so we seem to have entered a pattern today where we're almost in a sort of death spiral. The most extreme or the most active, which induces the politicians to be responsive, which further induces the more moderate members to further ignore politics. And that's exactly the pattern we're seeing. And so in response to your question about diversity, I wonder, I think it's likely important because it will create incentives for everyone to participate, but what can one do to bring members who are currently alienated from politics back in? I don't know.
Let me pick up on something you just said, though, about the wing determining what's going on, basically. We are destroying the political center of this country. We don't have a strong middle of the road group in Congress today. The Tuesday group that used to operate very vigorously in the House of moderate to liberal Republicans has gone from about 76, 80 members down to less than 25. The Blue Dog Democrats, of which Congressman is a member, have gone from the 70s down to the 20s. Your colleague, Lugar, is one of the last examples of a middle-of-the-road, moderate Republican senator. He just got run out. There is no middle that's viable in the Congress today. And these pressures from the wings are killing the opportunity for there to be a middle, and that's where America needs to be governed from. And if we don't realize that this is a clear and present danger to our system, we are headed down a path that's going to really lead to very dire consequences, of which the economy, the deficits, all of those issues are merely symptoms. The problem is our system of governance. And if we can't reestablish a center in American politics, we've got, as I said before, some very rough days ahead.
Congressman Bishop, and then
I was struck by what Professor Clark indicated in terms of the diversity, and Senator Nunn with the wings flapping. The extremes are driving the process. They are more active, they're more vocal, they get more attention from the media, and it turns off the middle, and the middle does not participate. If you look at the number of people who participate in elections across our country, you will see that it's far less than the number of folks who are eligible and who should be participating. And our government is only as good as the people we elect, and we only elect people as good as the electorate will put in office. So one of the discussions in this book was comparing our electorate, which is less than the number that should be participating, with some other countries like Australia, where they have close to 100 people participating in elections. I think the elections are mandatory. Everybody has to. We need perhaps some incentives so that people either get tax breaks to participate or they get penalized if they don't participate. But even in the worst countries in the world, they've got greater participation than we have. And of course, if our total population participated in our electoral process, you would have the diversity of all of the voices being heard. And of course, the opposite is taking place now. We've fought for years to have the Voting Rights Act so that minorities who had been historically excluded could participate. And that worked well. However, at this point, we're facing the reverse of that, because after the 2008 elections, through the American Legislative Exchange, there was a strategy developed to try to suppress the vote, eliminate early voting or reduce the length of early voting because certain demographics found that convenient to participate, and it drove up turnout, which helped President Obama get elected. So certain politicians decided that we need to do something to make sure that all of these people don't vote. Well, let's make it more restrictive by requiring photo ID. Statistics don't reveal that there has been that much voter fraud that would require the extreme measures that have been put into law in, I think, 29 states, and you've got probably 100 and plus pending. Well, if those measures are put into effect, you would make it much more difficult for several hundred million people to be able to vote.
Okay, and
Okay,
on that note,
so I'm-
and on that note, I'm sorry, just briefly, and we're about to close, and
Okay,
I
well-
wanted to wrap this
Okay.
up with one final question.
Well, I was going to make some of the folks mad at this panel a little
Okay.
bit if I could.
Do it quickly, 'cause I must get my question in.
Okay, because speaking of diversity, I'm the R on the panel, okay? And so let me just say that, you know, when Michelle Obama comes to Atlanta and you want and you want her to autograph her new book, you need to show a photo ID to get in the line. When you want to go visit an individual in their federal office, you have to show a photo ID. When you want to sit there and go to Target this afternoon and give them a check, you got to show a photo ID. Why all of a sudden it's a conspiracy against minority voting to show a photo ID to vote, to me is foolish, as criticizing the Tea Party for actually wanting us to avoid the fiscal cliff. I think those partisan comments are frankly what this panel was intended to reduce rather than heighten.
Well,
Thank you
may,
so
may,
much.
I, may I just respond? I understand what you're saying, but when you have an elected leader in the state of Pennsylvania who gets up and publicly says, this is the reason we want to pass this law, because we want to stop those young people from voting, those students, because they don't know what they're voting for anyway. They don't have sense enough to vote the right way. When somebody who is elected, who's a leader in our legislature, says that that's a specific reason why they're enacting these restrictive laws, we've got a problem.
But both political
Okay,
parties
so
have
now we're going to
holes.
move to,
Both.
okay, I'm going to exercise my discretion as the moderator and as a judge in this state.
You're the judge.
And I'd like to say that the presidential election is really literally around the corner. What impact will this election have on the citizenry, and what would you like to see, Senator Nunn? And we'll just go right on down the.
Well, it looks like on the polls it's going to be pretty much a muddle. I mean, I don't know who's going to get elected president. I don't know who's going to control the Senate and the House. But the chance of, as I said a minute ago, one party being able to impose its will is very unlikely, very unlikely. So I think hopefully after the election, people will realize the seriousness of the challenges we face and decide they're going to work together. We don't know that, but I hope Congress will basically start reforming its own act. There are a lot of things wrong in the Congress today that can be corrected by the leadership if they have some followers. One thing is the confirmation process has gotten completely out of hand. It's way too hard to get confirmed. People are exercising vetoes over. One senator can now veto a judge being even considered. And the filibuster, you can debate a long time about 60 votes being required, but no matter whether you're for it or against it, it's really being abused now. People don't even have to filibuster anymore to really hold up legislation. All they got to do is send a note in to the leader and say, if this comes up, we're going to have extended debate, and they just delay the legislation. So it's gumming up the whole system. The time for Mitch McConnell and Harry Reid to get together and make some deals is right now.
Right.
In terms of the Senate rules, because nobody knows who's going to control the Senate. And after the election, it's going to be too late, because whoever's in the minority is not going to want to give up any right they have now. But right now would be a time for them to get together quietly. They don't have to announce it, and probably shouldn't, but they need to make a deal and bring in the other people in the leadership. So I don't know what's going to happen after the election, but I do know that we face a fragile situation economically, and the parties have to get together. And somebody mentioned it, I don't know whether it was Elliott or one, but I agree with it completely, and that is that it's not simply a numbers game. If the world is confident that we've got trajectory of our fiscal matters heading in the right direction, even if it takes 10 to 20 years, and it will take a lot of time, then we're going to be able to continue to borrow the money we need. But we've got to stabilize the deficit as a percentage of our overall economy. We have to do that. I keep talking about fiscal, but we have 10 trillion, not billion, trillion that we're faced with in deficits over the next 10 years. The biggest package we're talking about, the Obama-Boehner, Simpson-Bowles, Domenici-Rivlin, the biggest one was 4 trillion out of the 10, leaving 6 trillion in deficits if we do everything right. That's how deep this hole is. So I'm hoping that after the election, we will have people that really understand that. The only other thing I would say, I think the news media has a responsibility here too. You know, you basically have got a situation where the budget can be explained, but it's going to take the print media and the television media to explain it. And they got to hold candidates accountable, because the arithmetic being thrown around out there now, if you know the figures, is just abysmal. It's really abysmal. The thing I would like to see most after the election is for the president to call the members of the top leadership, Republicans and Democrats together, no matter whether it's Romney or Obama, get on television, don't try to come up with a solution, but say to the American people, here are the facts. We all agree on the facts. Now, we're going to fight about some of this, but these are the facts we face. If they did that, it wouldn't take but 1 hour on national television for people to understand it. This country will respond when they get the honest facts. They aren't getting them now.
General,
first,
regardless of who wins, do you see positive changes after November the 6th for the citizens?
well, number one, I totally agree with what Senator Nunn said. Number two, you have to remain positive because we don't have a choice. There isn't an option other than that. I frankly think this country needs to look at term limits. As a general statement, it's been my experience that when folks are there too long, they're more interested in their position than our country. And I would say that both on the state and national levels. I'm a big supporter of term limits. And I think that there is nothing more important to our country, as Senator Nunn stated, than our fiscal crisis. And I believe that the public needs to really pay significant attention. And I also agree with Senator Nunn that I think a villain in this process, candidly, is the media, because I don't think they're doing their job at all. It is really hard to get media to actually cover facts rather than opinion. And I think in this 24/7 day that one gentleman stated on this side, we deserve to actually get facts rather than just opinion, and for us to make our own decisions based on those facts.
Congressman, after November the 6th, would you forecast that our leaders would be willing to engage in the art of compromise to resolve some of the issues? Or
We have no choice. We have no choice. January 2nd, 2013 is when the guillotine or the sword of the sequester will fall, and it will devastate our country. On the defense side, it will hollow out our military. On the non-defense side, it will make them the most vulnerable in our country just completely devastated also. So we have got to rise up and be adults. We need adults, and I believe that once the election is behind us, regardless of the outcome, that we will then be able to focus not on the next election, but on what's good for the people of this country. And we've got some drastic situations that we're faced with. And this election, I think, is probably one of the most important in our history going forward. The fiscal cliff that we're faced with, if we don't change what we are doing immediately, by 2025, we'll only have enough revenue coming in to pay the interest on our national debt, which is now almost $16 trillion, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. No defense, no education, no transportation, no infrastructure, nothing else, without having to borrow money. And who will we have to borrow from but China, our competitor, our enemy, the OPEC countries? We're taking the money that we spend on oil and subsidizing our enemies. We have got to do the adult thing. And pox on Congress if we don't rise to the occasion. The American people expect it. We've always done it in our history. We've dealt with our problems, and we've got to do it. I believe we will.
Congressman Levitas, your closing comments.
I agree with everything I've heard from my colleagues. One thing.
Yes, sir.
I don't think it's going to happen. I hate to be the pessimist in the group, but I don't see any indication that the obstructionists, the non-compromisers, after the election are going to all of a sudden wake up on Wednesday morning and say, now let's be cooperative and good and work together. In the event that President Obama is reelected, the rhetoric that I hear, hatred that I hear, anger that I hear is going to be there, and that people will be cursing the outcome of the election. And although Senator McConnell won't be able to say that my job is to keep him from being more than a one-term president, I think that attitude is going to continue. And I think what it's going to take, and I agree with you, Congressman, that at some point the American people will do the right thing, but I don't think we're at that point. I think it's going to take a lot more pain in reality. If we didn't realize the consequences of our credit rating being downgraded as a result of the stalemate in Congress and react at that point and say, yeah, we can't do this. When Sam and I were in Congress together at the same time, we had votes on raising the debt ceiling almost every year or every 2 years. And it was a big political discussion, but that's all that it was. At the end of the day, whichever party, whether it was a Republican is in the White House or a Democrat in the White House, people finally realized that that vote was a symbolic vote and we had to raise the national debt ceiling. That didn't happen this time until disaster struck. And I don't see an attitude in the country today that's going to change that until we feel a lot more pain and suffer a lot more setbacks as a result of this intransigence.
Thank you, sir. Professor Clark, give us a wrap-up academic type.
Well, I hate to be a wet blanket, but I think I have to be good company for the congressman and say that while as a voter and a citizen, I hope that the first three speakers were right in their prediction. I fear that the congressman is correct because I don't, as a political scientist and academic studying politics, I don't see what types of structural changes one might expect in the wake of the election that could fix what are currently the structural problems inducing gridlock and an inability to compromise. I think that the opening comments about the lack of compromise now still stand, and I don't forecast anything being different after the election. In fact, it's likely to be worse insofar as those who are most likely to lose their elections this year are the most political moderates. And so as a consequence, we should expect nothing more than an equally, if not more polarized Congress in the wake of the election, and short of fundamental structural changes that induce the political moderates who are increasingly checking out from the system to begin participating, then I don't see why that would change. And so unfortunately, from an academic perspective, I think there's less reason to be hopeful than there is from a citizen's perspective.
All right, now I'm going to return to the
I
senator.
just want to leave you with a little bit of optimism here.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Winston Churchill famously said, "America will always do the right thing after it has tried every other alternative." We are in the process of trying the other alternatives, but we will do the right thing. Also, Will Rogers said, your problem with politicians, it doesn't just begin with the modern era. Will Rogers once said, "Politicians are like diapers. They have to be changed often and for the same reason."
Well said.
I'd like to say thank you so much for your attention this morning, and please, let's again thank the members of the panel. Thank you.